We're here tonight with Dr. Larry Rosen, and Dr. Rosen was our keynote presenter today at the Council on Chemical Abuse's annual conference. And I want to give you a little bit of information about Dr. Rosen. He is a professor and past chair of the psychology department at California State University in California. Over the past 25 years, Dr. Rosen and his colleagues have examined reactions to technology among more than 30,000 people in the United States and in 22 other countries. He has written 5 books. Is it 5? Yes, 5 books, including Eye Disorder. If you're interested, we have copies of Eye Disorder out there. The gentleman up here is reading it right now. It's Eye Disorder, Understanding Our Obsession with Technology and Overcoming Its Hold on Us. Also, Rewired, Understanding the I Generation and the Way They Learn. Me, MySpace, and I, Parenting the Net Generation. Techno Stress, Coping with Technology at Work, at Home, at Play, and the Mental Health Technology Bible, and writes a technology column for newspapers, The National Psychologist, and a regular blog for the magazine Psychology Today. Dr. Rosen has been featured extensively in television, print, and radio media, and has been a commentator on Good Morning America, NPR, and CNN. He has been quoted in hundreds of magazines and newspapers, including USA Today, the New York Times, Newsweek, Time, Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Dr. Larry Rosen.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is talk about the psychology of technology, and I thought I would give you a little bit of a background. I started my career as a mathematics major in college. And I made it all the way to my senior year before I realized that math sucked, and that teaching math to other kids sucked, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went around exploring what other fields used math and where I could do something that seemed much more interesting, and ended up finding psychology, and found that it was fascinating and interesting. And when I became a professor, it was just about the time that huge computers were being used. And most of you are way too young to remember this, but we used to use key punch cards where we would, the old people go, yeah, I remember those, where we used to punch these cards that you could hold up and you could look through them and see the light through them. And very early in my teaching career, I taught a statistics class, and students hate statistics anyway. But the first day I said, we're in for a treat this semester, it's going to be really fun. We're going to do our statistics on the computer, so you don't need any calculators. This computer's going to do everything. And I showed them the machines that they were going to use and how easy and fun it was going to be. And the next class period, half the students had left. And I knew it wasn't me. It turned out it was the computers. So almost 30 years ago, I started studying something called computer phobia. And since then, I've evolved in the way I look at technology, but basically it's always surrounded how people react to technology. So what you're going to hear today is sort of an up-to-date modern view of how our world works technologically. And I'm going to start by talking to you about different generations and how different generations relate to technology differently. I'm going to talk about the kinds of technology that different generations use, the different styles of communication, how we're all going crazy multitasking and task switching, our values, our beliefs, and then we're going to talk about the teenage brain, and then I'm going to talk about why it's all making you crazy. So we are right now in the middle of 5 or maybe 6 or maybe who knows how many generations. People who study generational differences all agree that the silent generation started in the mid-20s and ended in the mid-40s, and the baby boomer generation started in the mid-40s and ended in the mid-60s. After that, they didn't know what to call generations. So based on a science fiction novel, they decided, well, let's use the letter X. It stands for unknown in mathematics, and so why not call it Generation X, because we have no idea what they're going to be like. And so Generation X started in 65, and most people believe it ended in the late 70s, somewhere 79, 78, 80. And after that, nobody agrees on anything. And we always argue about generational differences and similarities. But I'm of the mind that generations should not be labeled by either letters or when they arose, but by what their common technology, the common theme of that generation is. So we call the generation born roughly in the 80s as the net generation after the internet. The generation that was born and raised in the 90s, the I generation with the little I for all the personalized individual devices like iPhones and all those things. And then we're starting now to study this generation of young kids born in the year 2000, and we're calling them Generation C, not because it's a random letter, but because this generation probably will be, already is, and will be the most connected generation ever. Notice, by the way, that generations are getting smaller and shorter. And the reason we believe it's getting smaller and shorter is because technology. I hope you like comic strips. I'll read these if you can't see them. On the left, the teacher says, on the board it says, what I did on my holidays, and the kid in the front row says, can I just email you a link to my blog, teacher? And on the right, it's first smile, first wave, first steps, first text message, and the parents saying, oh, we're so proud. And part of what is happening in our world is the pace of technology has exploded. And people who study consumer purchases talk about something called penetration rate. And that's when a technology or an idea hits 50 million people. They say it has penetrated society. So for example, radio took 38 years to penetrate society. Long time. Those people who grew up around radio realized that somebody had a radio on the block, everybody crowded around. It took a long time for people to get their own radio and for it to penetrate society. The telephone took 20 years. Television only took 13. Cell phones took 12. And when World Wide Web hit, everything went crazy. It took only 4 years to penetrate society. iPods took only 3. Blogs took only 3. MySpace took 2.5. Facebook took only 2. YouTube took just 1 year to penetrate society to hit that 50 million point. And Angry Birds took 35 days. 35 days, 50 million people were playing Angry Birds. So you can understand that our world has changed rapidly. If you look back in the old days, technologies took a while to filter into society. We had time to think about them. We had time to integrate them into our lives. Now there's no time. They just show up. And as an example, if you look at all those technologies on the board, not one of them existed before the year 2000. And every single one of those is a very common technology that is used by most people. Those have penetrated society. And people use them all at the same time. I don't know if you get this comic strip in your newspapers that you do. This is called Zits. My favorite comic strip, this is Jeremy. Meet Jeremy. He's about 16 perennially. And this is his bewildered dad. You'll see his bewildered mom later. But his dad says, hey, Jeremy, what are you watching? And Jeremy says, on which screen? Because he's got the television on, his laptop on, and he's got his phone screen. Part of what is really important in this day and age, and I think part of what defines the new generation, particularly the last two generations, the I generation and Generation C, is that much of their life is spent behind screens. It's behind a glass screen. And when people wonder why there is cyberbullying, why there are Facebook wars, hold up a screen to yourself. Hold up your phone screen. What do you see? You see the reflection of you. You don't see what's through the screen at the other end. And so kids that bully other kids online, for example, can do so very easily because behind that screen, they're somewhat anonymous. People can't see them, and so they believe they don't know who they are. It turns out to be very important. Sometimes technology just doesn't make any sense, particularly to old people. Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask, how many people in here, anybody from the silent or traditional generation, born mid-20s to mid-40s? Baby boomer generation, besides myself? Very good. Generation X, 1965 to 79. How about the net generation, born in the 80s? And any I generation, born in the 90s? Okay, good, good. No Generation C, born in the new millennium here? No? Oftentimes I have people bring their kids with them, so. So this is the teacher the first day saying, copy and study this list of text messaging spelling words. We'll have a test tomorrow. And I'm sure that most of you know at least LOL and most of these. How many people know what POS means? People who know aren't saying, right? People who know aren't going to say. Yes? Parent over shoulder. This is a text messaging acronym that people do use. If you're a parent, you should be aware of that one. It's also, the other equivalent is P911. And they certainly see the world differently. So this kid's saying, Mom, I built my first snowman, and he built it on a phone. This person's saying there aren't any icons to click, it's a chalkboard, and the kid doesn't know what to do. And down here, no, sweetheart, not everything is touch screen. She's trying to touch the screen. And so we live in this kind of interesting world, and these little kids growing up are growing up thinking everything is a touch screen, that they ought to be able to touch anything and make it work. So the question, and the research question that I study always is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, it is the future, and I'm going to try to show you where it's good or bad or both. So what we do is we study, among other things, generational similarities and differences, and generations differ on all of these areas. They differ on how much they use media, how much they multitask, how they communicate, how they socialize, certainly, the kinds of content they create, all of their values, whether they're values towards school or work, and how they learn. So what do they do with their media? If you look on the left, what you see are the three major generations that are in the workplace. I'll give you some other information on the younger generations in a second. But we collect information every year on each generation, and we look at several things. First of all, we look at how much daily media they consume. So baby boomers consume almost 8 hours a day of media. Gen X, we're up to almost 15. Net generation, 20.5 hours. Now, obviously, that's impossible. And the reason it's impossible, as you well know, is because nobody consumes one of these forms of media by itself. Everybody consumes them while multitasking, while doing more than one thing. In our studies, we always ask individually. So we might ask, how many hours a day do you watch TV? How many hours a day do you listen to music? We don't ask if you're watching TV with your earbuds in and listening to music at the same time you're watching TV. We know you are. So what's interesting is if you look at the different generations and you look at their preferences, meaning this is the top medium form, second, third place, fourth place, and we could go on. But baby boomers, the top form of media is TV and music, still the traditional forms. The third one is being on a computer. This is not being online. This is simply using a computer, word processing, spreadsheets, whatever. And then the fourth is being on the phone. If you look at Generation X, it looks similar. Music takes first position, computer takes second position, TV is shoved down into third, but now being online turns out to be important. And if you look at the net generation, born in the 80s, music and TV are still number 1 and 2, but going online and texting now show up as important activities. When you look at the younger generation, everything changes. And this is the youngest of the younger generation. The little one says, no, Grandma, listen, double-click the Internet Explorer icon. I used to use this one because I thought it was funny, but I told this story this morning that when I have a computer question, I email a friend of mine. His name is Mike. And I ask him a question, I type him a question, and he will email me back usually pretty quickly. He's a pretty good emailer. And he'll email me back and he'll say, Larry, nice to hear from you. That's a good question. If you look at this link first and read it, it'll explain the answer, and then email me and I can walk you through it. And he's very good at it, and he's 10. And he's been my computer consultant since he was 9. I didn't know him when he was 8, otherwise he would have been my consultant then. This is a typical Gen C kid. They know way more about technology than any of us do, and they use it way more than any of us do. So in this case, the teacher says, today I'm going to show you how to use a pencil sharpener. Are there any questions before I begin? And my friend Mikey would then say, yeah, I just texted them to you. So what are they doing with their media? Again, this is the same look, except now we split it into 4 to 8-year-olds, 9 to 12-year-olds, 13 to 15, and 16 to 18. And you notice that when we get to the little ones, it's pretty much TV and video games occupy most of their time. And notice the time, they still spend 5.5 hours with technology, working your way all the way up to the older teenagers that are at 20.5 hours. When you get to the 9 to 12-year-olds, video games seem to be prominent. 9 to 12-year-olds are masters of video gaming. They play more video games than any other age group at all. When you get to the 13 to 15-year-olds, music still takes most importance, but now texting is number 2, being online is number 3. And when you get into the 16 to 18-year-olds, music, texting, being online, and IM and chatting. So really it changes as you go across generations. And the younger generations are spending more time communicating. These are all communication tools that they're using. And they communicate differently. This is Jeremy's mom saying, Jeremy, why aren't you answering your phone? He says, it's probably nothing. How do you know? What if it's important? And you should know the punchline. If it was important, they would text me. And that's true. I can tell you from personal experience, my daughter who's 22 and just graduated college, I'm sure on the icon for her phone where it says how many messages she has, it's topped out at as many as you're allowed to have because she never answers her phone. She never looks at her messages because if somebody calls, she lets it go to voicemail, and then she texts them and says, what did you want? And then she expects them to text back and say, this is what I wanted, and back and forth and back and forth. If I actually want to talk to her, I have to text her. She and I had a text conversation going on today. What time are you free? Blah, blah, blah. Can we talk? Yes. What time should we talk? Okay, I'll call you at such and such a time. That's the only way she'll talk to me. And it's not that she's a bad kid. She's actually a good kid. She just doesn't believe in telephones. And trust me, that box, that little box that we all carry in our pockets is not a telephone. They call it a smartphone, but the phone is one of the least common activities on that device. The Nielsen Company, I don't know if you're familiar with the Nielsen Company, but they're the ones that do the television ratings. And they put boxes on your televisions or give you a diary to keep about what TV shows you're watching. And the goal is to figure out how many Americans are watching different kinds of TV shows. They also, since early 2007, have been collecting about 60,000 cell phone bills from teenagers every quarter. And they take the cell phone bills and they total up how many telephone calls you made and received and how many text messages you sent and received. And they do it every quarter, so through 2007, 8, 9, and then the most recent data are September 2011. And you can see the telephone calls have pretty much stayed even or gone down from 255 down to 196 now. But text messaging has become absolutely important, such that as of late last year, the average teenager sends and receives 3,417 texts a month, unless you're a girl, and then you're up to almost 4,000. How many people text actively? How many texts do you send a month? Send and receive.
I have no idea, honestly.
How many pages is your phone bill? 100?
No, because I have unlimited texting.
Yeah, but it's still listed. Even if you have unlimited texting.
I don't read the bill myself, you know?
What's your guess? How many do you think you do a day?
A day?
Yeah. 50?
Probably like 100.
100 a day. So multiply 100 by...
Because it's mostly my mom.
That's fine. Still texting. So multiply 100 by 30 and you're right up there.
At least 20 times today. Like back and forth.
Back and forth. See, texting has become the #1 communication modality for the younger generation. When you look at the younger generation, we look at the older generations, the #1 modality is face-to-face, followed by the phone, followed by email, for both of the two generations, both baby boomers and Gen Xers. When you get down to the younger generations, net generation, face-to-face is still #1, but texting all of a sudden becomes #2. When you get to the I generation, texting is #1, instant messaging, Facebook, and phone is #2, and face-to-face is a distant third. So no wonder kids are texting all the time rather than calling, because the phone is really not a great choice for them. By the way, parents always ask me, why won't my kid call me on the phone? My answer is always the same. Because if they're on the phone, they have to unitask, meaning they have to talk to you and listen to you. They can't do anything else unless they subtly type and do things like that. If they text you, there's time between when they send the text and when you text back that's all theirs. Did you have a question?
No, I had a comment, like that's true. Like I have to set aside time to call my grandma because she'll be on the phone for like 10 or 15 minutes. And she'll, like, I have to set aside time, like I don't have enough time. I call her like once every 2 weeks because I don't have enough time to talk to her. Like,
Right, because 15 minutes is exceedingly valuable, right?
well, like,
Think of all the other things you could do in 15 minutes.
no, because she'll talk
I'm
to
kidding.
me longer than I ever need her to. Like, I'll try and write a paper and she'll be like on the phone. I'll be like, okay, bye, Grandma. And then she'll start talking about something else. I'm like, Grandma.
This is why the younger generations do not like to talk on the phone. You just answered my question for me. So, is this part of multitasking madness? I did not take the picture on the right, but a friend of mine sent it to me. His kid was so engrossed in a game that she was playing that she was being potty trained, and so she went in and took her laptop with her. And this little kid is actually about 1.25 years and has both phones and is talking to one grandma on that phone and one grandma on that phone so that she could talk to both at the same time. In one study we did, we asked teens, how often do you switch from studying to doing something technological? Meaning checking your messages, answering a text, looking at websites, watching TV, listening to music, anything technological. From the left to the right, you have 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. This is the ones that say very often they do it. This is the ones that say somewhat often. This is the total. You can see that we're looking at roughly 80% of all teenagers believe that it's okay to switch from what you're doing to anything else at the same time. We call this continuous partial attention, meaning you pay partial attention here, then you pay partial attention here, then you move back and pay partial attention here, then you go to a third thing and pay a little bit of attention, and a little bit of attention, a little bit of attention, a little bit of attention. Can you do it? Well, you try. When we move from the youngest kids to the baby boomers, there is a steady increase in the number of things that people say they can do at the same time. It doesn't mean they can, but they say they can do it at the same time, peaking at the 16 to 18-year-olds who believe they can do 7 things at the same time. So which ones can you do? How many people can surf the internet and listen to music at the same time? Should be most of you, I would assume. How about read a book and listen to music at the same time? Older people can't do that. All the older people are, you can do that too?
Too bad, I'm older.
Good for you. I'm impressed. I can't do that at all. How about eating and playing a board game? Should be pretty simple, right? How about reading a book and watching TV? Yeah, a lot of people try that. Most of my students study in front of the TV.
Would you be reading a book like that we read for enjoyment?
Any
or
book.
A book that we're reading because we're here?
Any book.
'Cause that's two completely different
Okay,
kinds of reading.
can you read a book for enjoyment and watch TV?
Yeah,
Can you read a school book and watch TV?
no,
Do you ever do it?
no, because I can't.
Very good. See, you're very sensible. When I talk about metacognition, I'm going to tell you you've got it. How about read a book and talk on the phone? That one should be more difficult, although I know people try it, but that should be more difficult. How about read a book, text, Facebook, and listen to music with the TV on? There's one hand, one honest person here. If I ask a class of high school students, which I will day after tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking to some high school students. If I ask a class of high school students if they can do that, every single kid raises their hand. Every single kid believes they can do that.
I think that happens sometimes depending on how they're reading. If they're reading a book and it's on their phone or their iPad or their iPod, or, well, all the texting, Facebook, and music is going to pop up, so they're going to bounce back and forth.
Right. And they believe they can do them all at the same time, even though they're not. They're actually not doing them at the same time, which I'll tell you what they're doing. So here is again Jeremy's mom. Jeremy, why did you get a D on your chemistry test? Because I couldn't study for it. Why couldn't you study for it? Because my iPod battery was dead. And I love this one. It's like she's just staring at him like, what are you talking about? He says, you can't study without an iPod, Mom. And she says, yeah, Mendeleev managed to organize the periodic table. She's always bewildered by poor Jeremy. So how do students study? This has always been an interest of mine because I watch students studying in the library, and I laugh because they're studying and they've got the earbuds in, and they've got music on, or they've got their phone and they're constantly checking their phone and texting. So we decided to do a study where we went into 279 students' homes, middle school, high school, college homes. We told the students, we would like to observe you studying something important for 15 minutes, that's all, just 15 minutes. And we said, what we're going to do is observe you. We're just going to sit behind you. We gave them some practice. We said, you know, just get used to us. We're going to be sitting behind you, observing. And what they didn't know is what we were observing. And what we observed was, were they on task or off task? Meaning, they said they were going to study X, were they studying X? Did they have any technology on? iPod, TV, computer screen, whatever. If they had a computer screen on, how many tabs were open? How many windows were open? What window was in the main screen? What was the one they were mainly looking at? Did they have any study strategies? Did they develop any study strategies for studying? And Do they have a preference for what's called task switching, meaning doing one thing, switching to the other, going back, switching, versus doing one thing, finishing it, moving to the next, moving to the next, moving to the next. And then we also asked them what their grade point average was. And what we did is every single minute, from minute 1 to minute 15, we observed whether they were on task or not and what technology was in the background. So here's what you see. For the first couple of minutes, they're focused, roughly. And then they get distracted. And then they focus again. And then at 8 to 9 to 10 minutes, they get very distracted. And then they focus again, but we think this is kind of an artifact because we think they figured, oh, wait, the 15 minutes is coming to an end. Damn, I better look like I'm studying so they don't think I'm dumb. And so they started studying again, but they couldn't even hang on to it to the 15th minute, and they start to fall off. And studies have shown that this is not unique to high school, middle school, and college students, that when they look at computer programmers, people in a job programming computers, 3 to 5 minutes of focus before they switch to something else. Even medical students studying, 3 to 5 minutes before they switch to something else, and that something else is almost always something technological. We did give them the option to tell us they switched to go get something to eat or to get a drink or a cup of coffee or an apple or whatever. That happened, but not very much. Mostly they were distracted by technology. And if you look at how many windows on their computer were open, you notice that they start increasing and increasing and increasing until that sort of magic 8 to 9 minute, 10 minute time when they have the maximal number of windows open, and then it tails back off again. And of course, the students who were most off task had the most windows open. Then the other thing we wanted to do was ask, could you take just 15 minutes of study time and predict their grade point average? So we said, sure, why don't we try that? And we actually found 5 predictors that predicted their grade point average. If they stayed on task more, they had a better grade point average. I don't know if that's a life lesson or not. You should stay on task longer so you'll get a better grade point average. If they had study strategies specifically for studying, they had a better grade point average. If they preferred task switching, meaning working on something for a little bit, switching to this, switching back, they had worse grade point average. If they consumed more media during the day, they had a worse grade point average. And if they checked Facebook just once during the 15 minutes, they had a worse grade point average. All it took was once, and that was the only website of all of them that led to a worse grade point average. Talk about that later as what that is. So why do people do it? Why do people switch from something to something else? There's 2 reasons. One's internal and one's external. The internal one's called a human orienting response. It's biological. If I had a piece of paper balled up in my pocket and I threw it at you like this, you would probably knock it away, even if you weren't paying attention. It's called a human orienting response. You are aware all the time of stimuli in your environment. It's adaptive. It's so you don't get bricks falling on your head. It's so you don't get hurt. It's a biological, natural biological reaction. The blood vessels in the brain dilate. You're mentally aroused. You have a rush. You pay attention to stimuli in your environment. There's also an internal reason that comes from the outside, and that is that media is very attractive. It's full of sounds and sights and vibrations and stimulation. When your phone's sitting here and it goes like this and it vibrates, that grabs your attention. And it's very interesting and it's very exciting and you want to know what's there. We'll talk later about that. Is it really multitasking? All the research shows that you can't multitask. I mean, yes, to a certain extent you can. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, most of us. But you really can't do 2 tasks at the same time. If I put headphones on your head like this and I played one message into this ear and one message into this ear and I told you to pay total attention to this ear but try to figure out what's in this ear at the same time, you couldn't do it. Even if this ear is saying your name over and over and over again, you won't notice it because you're totally paying attention to here. If I ask you to have a conversation with me but there's 5 cross conversations, I can't do it. You can't pay attention that way. The reason that we think we can multitask is because really what we're doing is minuscule little minute task switches. So the easiest one is texting. If you text, you think you're multitasking, but you text and then you have a a little bit of what's called slack time. Between the time you text and the time you expect to text back, could be 10 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So you switch to something else and do that, and then you switch back when the text comes in. So part of why kids, younger generations like technology is because it affords a lot of task switching. It allows you to switch because there's slack time when things aren't happening as opposed to things happening. The most interesting slack time, by the way, is when you're loading a website. Unless you are on a super fast T1 connection, websites could take 2, 3, 5, 6 seconds to load. Now that doesn't seem like a lot of time. For us old people, 6 seconds seems like, it's no big deal. We just sit and wait and watch the screen. If you watch younger people, the amount of time that a young person is willing to wait for a website to load is, guesses? How much?
Less than a second.
Less than a second? Any guesses? That's pretty close. 2 seconds. The average young person is willing to wait 2 seconds. If a website doesn't load within 2 seconds, they click on something else. So the technology really affords you to switch. You can try to do things at the same time. You can really try, and the more dissimilar the tasks are, the easier it is to do 2 things at the same time. So if you're trying to read a book but read something on a screen, you can't do those. Those are too similar. But if you're trying to play a video game but also to read something, those are different enough that it's easier to task switch, easier to multitask. The more difficult the tasks are, the more difficult it is to switch back and forth. Now, in California, you can not talk on a handheld phone and drive at the same time. That's not true in Pennsylvania, though, right? You can talk on a phone and drive? Is that true? Because I did it last night. I figured it was. Is it not legal? You can't talk on the phone? Uh-oh.
In certain cities, it's not legal.
Certain cities, it's not legal. The reason that that was made illegal is because talking on the phone and driving both take a tremendous amount of mental processing. The more mental processing it takes, the harder it is to do 2 things at the same time. So why isn't it too difficult to drive and talk to a passenger? That's not illegal, right? You can talk to a passenger still. Why isn't that illegal?
You've got another set of eyes on the road most of the time.
You mean they're looking at the road for you?
You know, if you got a passenger in there, a lot of times they're watching and they know what not to
So they'll go, look out!
They won't ask you questions in maybe some of the more dire situations.
Okay, so if you get into a bad situation,
They'll know to be quiet.
okay,
When a driver needs to focus, well, most people will know to be quiet when a driver needs to focus.
okay, that's one of the explanations. Got a second one?
Is it more like dangerous to talk on the phone because you can't actually see the person, so your brain kind of has to focus, like try to.
Perfect. Perfect. What it does is it takes extra brain power. In psychology, we call it context. If the person's sitting next to me in the passenger seat, I know their context. They're sitting right there. I can look at them, I can see their facial expressions, I know if they're pissed at me, I know if they're laughing hysterically and they're happy, I know if they're crying, I know their context. If you're on the phone to somebody, you're exactly right. You have to guess their context. You might have to ask, are you okay? Are you happy? Are you sad? Whatever. You don't know their context, so you're using a lot of extra power of your brain to figure out their context. Now the funny thing is there any difference between handheld and hands-free phone in figuring out somebody's context? No, not at all. Yet in California, you can talk on a hands-free phone, but not a handheld phone. Why? No good reason. There's absolutely no reason. Either you ban both of them or neither of them. Doesn't matter. It's the same distraction. They thought, oh, there's more of a distraction of holding a phone. How many people actually drive with 2 hands anymore? You're driving with one and you're checking your radio and stuff with the other hand. That's not a ticket. So it's the context that requires you to do that. And the media itself affords task switching. If you watch TV, it's not just a TV screen anymore. There's information scrolling on the left and the right and going this way and that way and up and down. And so it affords task switching. If you watch the presidential debates on CNN, drove me crazy that they had that thing on the bottom with the independent voters in such and such, I guess the last one, I forget, in Virginia or whatever. and you're looking at the women and the men, and did you notice that you found yourself looking only at that and not even listening to what they were saying? That's distracting. So the technology itself distracts you. So the costs of multitasking are varied, you know this, but these two are really important. Multitasking leads to poor sleep habits and overuse of caffeine. Why do you overuse caffeine? Because when you multitask or when you're constantly task switching, you're using more mental resources and they run out. And at some point, you need caffeine to give you the illusion that you have more resources. You don't. You have the same amount of resources, you're just hyper about it. Kids don't sleep. That's the bottom line. All the research shows that the average teen or young adult averages 6.1 hours per school night and tries to make it up by sleeping 10.3 hours a night on weekends. American Pediatric Association recommends that you sleep 9 hours a night. How many people sleep 9 hours a night? Nobody, right? If you don't sleep 9 hours a night, and particularly teenagers, if they don't sleep 9 hours a night, they accumulate what's called a sleep debt. And this is like you owe money, except you owe sleep. What happens is when you have a sleep debt, your brain stops functioning well. And the reason it stops functioning well is sleep is absolutely critical to brain functioning. When you are awake during the day, you're getting lots of stimulation. Your brain's getting lots of stimulation. The neurons are communicating with each other. Your nerve cells are growing little shoots off of them. They're called axons and dendrites to communicate with other nerve cells. You're learning information, you're trying to accumulate information, and your brain's working really hard. At night, when you go to sleep, your brain does a bunch of bookkeeping stuff. It does a bunch of sort of, you might call it formatting. It kind of formats your brain in the middle of the night. And if you've ever read into the research about sleep, the way the process of sleep goes is if you are a well-rested human being and you go to sleep, you're asleep for about 90 minutes, go through several sleep stages, and then you dream. And dream is a separate sleep stage. You know how you can tell, right? You watch somebody's eyelids, and if they're fluttering, they're dreaming. It's called rapid eye movements. And so you sleep for about 90 minutes. Your first dream in the middle after that 90 minutes is about 3 minutes. It's a very short little dream. Then you go back into those sleep stages for another 90 minutes, and then you have a little bit longer dream, about 15 minutes. Then you go into another 90-minute sleep stage, and you have about a 30-minute dream state. And then you go another 90 minutes, and then you have about an hour. Your last dream is about an hour. So if you add it up, at about 7 to 8 hours is when you're dreaming. And for most people, that's when you wake up. How many people wake up in the middle of a dream? Most people do. And that's because that's the way the normal sleep cycle works. Now notice I said if you're well rested. If you're not well rested, what happens is that first 90 minutes goes away. You immediately start dreaming. And why do you start dreaming? Because your brain needs to dream. But your brain also needs those 90 minutes because during those 90 minutes, it does its reformatting. And what that means is your brain sort of on its own goes scouting around and it looks for information that's created during the day. Connections between neurons, little axons, little dendrites, the chemicals going back and forth between neurons. And it makes some decisions. It decides what's the good stuff that I might want to keep for later and what's the bad stuff that I might want to get rid of. If it keeps it for later, it's called consolidation. If it gets rid of it, it's called pruning, just like you prune a tree. It cuts off those pieces that it doesn't need. If your brain doesn't have those sets of 90 minutes to do the pruning and consolidation, then your brain becomes kind of a mass of confusion because it's carrying both stuff that ordinarily it would throw out, but it's also carrying stuff that it should have solidified and consolidated at night, but it didn't have time to do it. So the less you sleep, the less you learn and remember, or put better, you can't remember the right stuff. The right stuff is not differentiated because the wrong stuff would have been pruned and the right stuff would have been consolidated, and you're not getting a chance to do that. So sleep is critical, and if you're running at a sleep debt, you just fall asleep and go straight into dream state. Anybody take naps during the day? When you nap, do you dream? How long do you nap for typically?
2 hours maybe.
Okay. Do you dream immediately, do you think, or do you sleep 90 minutes and then go into a dream?
Dream probably immediately.
Yeah. When you take a nap, you almost always dream immediately. You know why? Why do you take a nap? Because you're tired, right? You don't take a nap because you feel good. You take a nap because you're tired. And if you're tired, then you didn't get enough sleep. Your naps are actually trying to make up for this 12 hours per week sleep debt. And so that's a good indication that your brain is not getting a chance to work right. We've just done a study where we looked at teens and what they do in the last hour before they go to sleep. And not surprisingly, they use their smartphone a lot. They use the internet a lot. They do schoolwork, which is good. But then they also text as much and Facebook and listen to music, etc. And we asked the questions as to what they do with their phone when they go to sleep. If you look just at the green area and this sort of orange area, this is almost all of this, and this is who leaves the ringer on, and this is who puts it on vibrate. So we asked the question, what does research say about sleep disruption? What is it that causes sleep disruption? People mostly believe that it has to do with a chemical called melatonin. When you start to get sleepy, your brain produces melatonin, and melatonin then puts you to sleep. Literally, that's its job. If you are watching TV, if you are looking at screens, light, artificial light, retards the production of melatonin. So that's why if you're really tired but you have the room lights on, it's going to be harder for you to go to sleep because the melatonin is not being produced. At least that's the theory. That's the theory from most sleep researchers. It turns out that we actually in this study measured how much melatonin you got. You can do it one of two ways. You can actually take a sample of saliva and it'll tell you how much melatonin there is, but it costs a lot of money to do that. Or you can simply measure how much time do people spend in front of different devices, how far away the device is, and how big the device is. So we asked people in the study, how much do you use your smartphone in the hour before you go to sleep, and how far is it from your face? How much do you use your computer, and how big is it, and how far is it in front of your face? How much do you watch TV? How big is the TV? How far is it in front of your face? How much is the room light on? Is it on full? Is it dimmed? How much of the time of the hour before you go to sleep? We did this complicated calculation formula and came up with a calculation that should have worked, and in fact it didn't. When we were going to predict what disrupted sleep, it is not the light. The light didn't matter. It is not watching TV or playing video games. In fact, it turned out that watching TV, those kids who watched more TV in the hour before they went to sleep slept better than those kids who didn't. So somehow TV is good for helping you go to sleep. I can explain that later if you want. It's not using the computer, so what is it? It's those people who multitask more in the hour before they go to sleep, who use their smartphone more in the hour before they go to sleep, and who sleep with their cell phone either on or vibrate all night long. Those are the three factors that go into disrupted sleep. So the bottom line is there's this concept in psychology called metacognition. And metacognition really means literally thinking about thinking. It's higher order thinking about how one thinks. Really, metacognition is understanding how your brain works. And most of what I do now is trying to help people or help myself understand what my brain does during the day and during the night. Metacognition is knowing how you learn better, what conditions you learn well in. Do you learn well with earbuds in, or do you learn well in quiet? How many people study in absolute quiet? Okay. Why do you study in quiet? Why have you decided to study in quiet?
Because a lot of things distract.
So okay, so you've decided otherwise it would be distracting. Who studies with music on? Okay, why do you study with music? Actually, behind you, you've already talked about it. Behind you. Why do you study with music on?
If I just sit there and study and listen to silence, I just let my mind wander.
Okay, so your mind wanders and you get distracted. So what kind of music do you listen to?
Music melodic, you probably understand.
Is it music that you've heard a lot, that you know really well?
Yeah, because it's kind of like my background noise.
Okay. That's the recommendation, by the way, is if you're going to study with music on, only study with music that you know so well that you can sing it in your sleep. You know why? When you look at the brain activity and you look at the brain listening to a brand new piece of music by your famous artist, your favorite artist, whoever it happens to be, there's a lot of brain activity going on the first couple times you listen to that piece of music. Once you've listened to it a few times, there's very little brain activity going on. Meaning, as long as you're listening to stuff that you know really well, you're not distracting yourself. You're leaving enough of your brain open. Should you listen to just classical music without words? Only if you really listen to classical music all the time, and it's pieces that you can do this and bat out the tune and hum. Otherwise, classical music is no better. I mean, professors always used to tell me when I was a student, oh, study with classical music. It's so mellowing and calming, and there's no words to distract you. Actually, the best thing to study to is music that you are very, very, very familiar with. So we did a study to see about metacognition. Actually, that's a lie. We did a study to see about distractions. It turned into a study about metacognitions accidentally. What we did is we went into 4 different classrooms, psychology classrooms. We got a list of everybody's cell phone number and their cell phone carrier, and we asked them to allow us to text them during class. We set up a class such that they were going to watch a 30-minute video, and they knew that they might get texted during class. They all had their phones out on vibrate only, not on sound, and they knew that right after the 30-minute video, they were going to be tested, and it was going to count in their grade. So we made it really important, okay? We split the people randomly in each class into 3 groups. A third of them randomly got no text from us. A third of them got 4 texts from us in 30 minutes, and a third of them got 8 texts from us in 30 minutes. The only instruction we gave was, we're going to text you, please respond. That is a mistake. I'll explain to you why. That was a stupid mistake. What we meant to say was, please respond when you get the text. The reason we said that is because we timed the text messages to arrive when information was on the video screen that was going to be on the test. The test had 18 questions on it. Those 8 text messages were all timed to arrive at one of those 8 of those spots for the test questions, right? So we thought, oh, they'll get a text message, they'll lean down, they'll text, they'll miss what's on the screen. That was our idea, right? Well, it sort of worked. The group that got no text averaged a C on the test, 72%. The group that got 4 text averaged a little bit less, only 70%, but those were equal statistically, no difference. The group that got 8 texts got a D. Okay, so far so good. When we started looking at the data more carefully, we realized that some people didn't respond immediately. In fact, they waited. And so the white line here is how long they waited to read the text message, to look at it, from the first minute, the second minute, the third, the fourth, etc. The green line is how long they waited to respond, first minute, second minute, third minute, fourth minute, and the score they got on the test. So if they responded really quickly, they got about a C on the test. If they waited to respond, they got an A. And we asked them afterwards, because we didn't expect this, so we asked them afterwards, why did you wait to respond? And the answer was, we waited for a time on the video that we thought wouldn't be on the test, and that was a good time to respond. That is metacognition. That is metacognition. When I teach in a classroom like this, but it's got 450 seats, and I tell students they can text all they want. They can't answer the phone, but they can text, they can have their laptop out, they have wireless, they can do whatever they want. They want to be on Facebook, cool, I don't care. But I tell them, this is the first lecture, and I tell them, if you want to see, go ahead and text away. Just text immediately. Every time you get a text in class, just text back. If you want an A, figure out what the best time to text back is. Wait until I'm saying something totally boring that you think isn't going to be on the test, then text back. And I did that the other day. There was a woman sitting right here in the front row, and I watched her. She got a text. I don't know why she was sitting in the front row, but she got a text, and I had a slide on the screen, and I was talking about it. She got a text, and she's very carefully, not even hiding it because I don't care, she's very carefully texting back. I moved to the next screen, and I said, stop for a second. And I asked her, I said, did you get what I just talked about on that last screen? She went, no. What was on the last screen? I went back, showed it to her. She goes, oh, I didn't hear that at all. I said, maybe you want to go back to that study that I talked about the first day of class about when to text and when not to text, because you just proved my point. You missed everything. And just all she did was send a text, but she missed the entire slide and all the information. So how do you do this? One of the simplest methods is called the ABC method. A is being aware of your options, and really it's being aware of your distractors. So it's like what you said when you said you study in quiet. You get rid of your distractors. So being aware of your distractors is important, and really being aware of what personally distracts you. Music doesn't distract me much at all. So I'm actually happy listening to really loud music. It doesn't distract me in anything except when I'm writing. And I know when I'm writing, I need no sound whatsoever. TV distracts me totally, so I know it has to be off. I can't work with the TV on at all. So being aware of your distractors. B, I'm going to talk about calming and resetting your brain in a bit, but it's breathe for calm and reset yourself. And C, choose good options. Use metacognition. Know how your brain works. That's important. I already said that about music. Going to move on. How much time do I have? We have till 8:30? Yeah, we have till 8:30? Good. Got some more stuff I want to show you. We do a lot of studying of values. We don't just look at generations, we look at their values and try to figure out what they believe in. Whoops, sorry, backwards. So we've been studying both the two youngest generations, the I generation and Generation C, those two young groups born in the 90s and the new millennium. And we're finding that their values are very different than older generations. For one, they have really three core values. One is social connections. They believe that social connections are everything, and not necessarily face-to-face connections. It doesn't mean they can't have them, but any kind of connection, and that means usually virtual, Facebook kind of connections, other social media kind of connections. When you watch younger kids, instead of doing things that ordinarily in my generation or the generations after they would have done in pairs, they do in large groups because they believe in social groups. They do not like projects in classes unless you can work with other people. In general, the younger ones, they would prefer to work with other people. They believe in speed and immediacy, and that's an obvious one because they've grown up in a generation or an era where everything happens fast. If you grew up in my era where we worked on 300 baud rate modems that literally you'd take the phone, ring it, stick it in the coupler, and then wait about 5 minutes to make a connection, speed and immediacy was nothing. 5 minutes seemed like a short amount of time. Now when you're connected to the internet and everything happens really fast, 2 seconds is the sort of limit of how much time people are willing to wait. And then this idea that anything that can be done, they can do. It's this whole new concept of younger people creating their own businesses. It's the Mark Zuckerberg concept of creating a company at a young age. It's the entrepreneurship drive of the two younger generations. They honestly believe that if they have an idea, they can actualize the idea, put it into action, make a lot of money on it, and then do something different. They trust themselves. Some people say this is the most narcissistic generation. They trust other people. They have a very spoiled upbringing. Sorry to tell you, those of you who are young, they have a very spoiled upbringing. They've been brought up with anything they want, toys, games. In the old days, by old days I mean 40s and 50s, Christmas meant you got a present if you were lucky. These days, Christmas, you get dozens of presents. In the old days, you got a trophy if your team won a sport. These days, you get a trophy if your team plays in a sport. It's very different. It's a very different, sort of promotes very different ideas about the world. This generation, the new generations, are very idealistic, very liberal. They have obviously different communication modalities, very different career goals. Previous generations expected to be in a job and to eventually find what job they were going to work in fairly quickly. The younger generations job hop. When they're in the job market, they job hop from year to year to year, for good reason sometimes. The younger generations are way more connected to family, and sadly, for those of you who have kids in college, they'll probably move back home because that's what they do. They move back home, and when this young generation is asked, who are your best friends? And they ask it in a variety of ways. Who would you go to with a problem? Who is the first person you would talk to? It's almost always somebody in their family. The generation before that, it was always their best friend. The generation before that, it was always their best friend. All of a sudden now it's back to their family. They have a very strong work ethic, but they're very distractible. They're very, very social, but they do not like hierarchies. These young generations do not like the boss-worker hierarchy, the professor-student hierarchy. Up until recently, I rarely got complaints from students. And all of a sudden I started getting complaints, but not in person, only by email. I started to get one here, one there, and I've noticed that it accelerates. And the reason it's happening is because these younger generations that are moving into the classrooms don't believe there should be a hierarchy. They believe that they can talk to a professor the same way that they talk to a friend. So I'll get an email that says, Dr. Rosen, that was a crappy lecture. You went too fast, your slides were crappy, I didn't like the lecture, you really need to change that one. And my answer is always the same. Thank you so much for your feedback. Can you come chat with me after class? I would like to hear more feedback. They never come after class. And in a class of 400, I never know who they are. It's that sense of behind the screen, they have this anonymity and they can say whatever they want and feel comfortable doing that. And it's very difficult in a university setting. It's more difficult in a business setting. Because in a business setting, they just assume since they're available 24/7, this ought to be available 24/7. So they email their boss in the middle of the night and then get upset if their boss doesn't email them back immediately. They like working in teams. They prefer deadlines, but no progress reports. Previous generations, if you're ever in a meeting with people my age, older people, and younger people at the same time, the older people all want to talk about how we're going to do this. How are we going to do the project? Let's set deadlines. Let's set sub-goals. Let's set markers. We're going to finish this chapter by this point, and this chapter by this point, and this chapter by this point. Younger people want to go, give me the deadline, I'll do it. And in fact, they'll do it, and it's a very smart generation. They'll do it, but mostly they'll do it the last 24 hours. And they'll work all night long and do it the last 24 hours. People have actually studied this. This younger generation pulls more all-nighters than any generation in history. And trust me, my generation pulled a lot of all-nighters, but this generation way more than any generation in history. They prefer to be evaluated all the time. All the time. They want pats on the back all the time. In previous generations, you were patted on the back if you're in baby boomer once a year. Once a year you got an evaluation, you got a raise in your job, you got a corner office, whatever. Now this generation wants to be patted on the back after everything. They do something good, pat them on the back. Something good, pat them on the back. They need constant reinforcement, constant reassurance that they're good. And they are definitely not patient. Jeremy says, God, I've been waiting forever for this stupid web page to load. His dad asks, how long is forever? Around 4 seconds, I guess. Jeremy, let me explain to you something about patience. Okay, you almost finished? I'm bored. So let me talk about technology and health, because this is something I'm very interested in. I did a study actually with a graduate student of mine back in 2009, and we interviewed 1,000 parents of kids, children, preteens, and teens. And we asked the parents, it was a very lengthy interview, we asked the parents to tell us all about themselves. So we got demographic information, we got their height and their weight, we got their health records, we had an assessment of their physical health, their emotional or psychological health, their attitudes, their behavioral health. We had information about what they ate every day, their standard diet. We had information about how much they exercised, how much media they used. We had information about all sorts of stuff. It was a 2.5-hour interview. It was very long. And the question we asked was, can your use of media predict your health even after you account for the known factors? So for example, I know that if a kid is fat, for example, that they are going to be unhealthy. I know that. It's a given. I know if a kid's parents are fat, the research shows they're going to be unhealthy. That's a given, right? I know if a kid doesn't exercise at all, they're going to be unhealthy. They eat junk food, they're going to be unhealthy. So we basically postulated a model that looks like this. We know demographics lead to media use. We know that using too much media leads to lack of exercise and unhealthy eating. We know that both of those lead to poor health. We know that, so let's account for it statistically and get it out of the way. So then the question comes, after you account for all the known stuff, can media use directly predict bad health? And particularly, can it predict bad health for kids of different ages? So we split the kids into 4 to 8 children, 9 to 12 preteens, 13 to 18 teenagers. For children, those children that use more total daily media after accounting for demographics, eating habits, exercise, everything, those kids who use more daily media were sicker. More physical illness, more psychological illness, more behavior problems, more attitude problems, more attention problems, all of that. Preteens that use more total daily media and preteens who played more video games were more unhealthy. When you got up to the teenagers, it was more daily media, more video games, and more time spent online. All 3 of those contributed to be sick. So that upset us, so that we decided, okay, now let's focus on mental health. Can technology make you crazy? That should have been the title of the talk. Can technology make you crazy? Well, it turns out that it sort of can. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM-4-TR, divides psychological maladies into Axis 1 and Axis 2. Axis 1 are more mood disorders. Axis 2 are considered more serious personality disorders. So the typical mood disorders would be depression, mania, you know what those are, and then dysthymia is a more mild form of depression. Axis 2 personality disorders, some examples are narcissism. You know what narcissism is, right? OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, antisocial disorder, those are all Axis 2. So what we did is we interviewed online in an anonymous survey 1,143 adults, average age 31, mostly ranging in the young to old age range. And they took a measure called the MCMI-3, the Milan Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory. And then we did 3 separate kinds of analyses. First, we looked to see if any specific kind of media use predicted who might have those symptoms of disorders. And in media use, we used all those ones we talked about before. How much time you spend online, how much time you spend texting, watching TV, listening to music, how many you know personally, how many you don't know personally, thinking that those might be important variables to predict who might have symptoms of psychiatric disorders. We also looked at how anxious people get when they can't check in with their technology, how anxious people get when they can't check in with Facebook, text messaging, phone calls, email, etc. And the third one had to do with attitudes, what your attitudes were toward technology and your attitude toward multitasking or switching back and forth. So first of all, how obsessed are people? The way to look at this chart is the black bars are all the I generation born in the 90s. The orange bar is the net generation born in the 80s. The white bar or gray bar is Gen X, born between 65 and 79. And the yellow bar are baby boomers. And what we're asking here is, how often do you check each technology, texting, cell phones, Facebook, etc.? And this is the percentage that check every 15 minutes or less. Notice the 2 younger generations are checking their text messages every 15 minutes or less. They're checking their phone calls. About half of them check their phone calls every 15 minutes or less. About half of them check Facebook every 15 minutes or less, etc. Notice that the yellow ones, baby boomers, don't seem to obsessively check with anything at all. And the Gen Xers seem to be a little less obsessed, but still obsessed. We also asked them, how anxious do you get if you can't check in? And this one's kind of interesting. You do see that the I generation and the net generation get anxious if they can't check their text messages or their cell phone calls or Facebook. The baby boomers only get anxious if they can't check their voicemail. That's the only thing that makes baby boomers anxious. But that's right? We get anxious if we have a voicemail and we might miss it because it could be from somebody important. Could be from work, could be from our family. We want to check it often. It's very important. So our question was, what impacts disorders? Now I'm going to have to tell you how to read this chart. On the left-hand side are 3 mood disorders, dysthymia, mania, and major depression. And 6 personality disorders: narcissism, histrionic personality disorder, compulsive, schizoid, paranoid, antisocial. Those are the most common ones. Across the top are the 3 Facebook variables: how much they use it during the day, how much they use it to manage their impressions, and how many friends they have. And then this is the other predictors. So let me show you how to read the chart. Each line has at least 1 or 2, 3 or 4 major predictors. That means they were statistically significant after factoring out all the alternative explanations, which we always do. So for example, I'll do an easy one. Narcissism. Those people who show more signs of narcissism have more Facebook friends, manage their impression more often, and use Facebook more often, and that's the only technology, no other technology, predicts narcissism. So Facebook seems to make people narcissistic. Why is that? Facebook's all about me. It's all about me, 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 me. It's all about me. It's all about who I am, what I do, posting pictures, posting things about me. What about mania? Everything you do with Facebook makes you more manic, and listening to more music per day makes you more manic also. What about dysthymia? Actually having friends, more Facebook friends, makes you less dysthymic, and talking on the phone more often makes you less dysthymic. So that's good information. If you're prone to having depression, then a good thing would be having more Facebook friends that you could talk to at any time, and having more people that you could talk to on the phone more. Same thing for major depression, actually. Having more Facebook friends makes you less depressed, although it is number 3 here compared to number 1 for dysthymia. And spending more time online makes you more depressed, but talking on the phone makes you less depressed. And then you can see that Facebook turns out to be a major predictor of almost everything. The only one it isn't even involved as a predictor is paranoid, being paranoid. Those people who listen to more music, it's the only predictor of signs and symptoms of paranoia. Don't know why. Doesn't make any sense to me intellectually, but makes sense statistically. Also, the anxiety plays a big role. Those people who are more anxious about not checking in with Facebook are more narcissistic. Those people who are more anxious about not checking in with their text messages were more depressed. Those people who were more anxious about not checking with either of them were more manic. And in terms of attitudes, those people who preferred multitasking, more narcissistic. Those people who believed technology was bad, more depressed. Those people who believed that technology was bad and they preferred to task switch or multitask were more manic. So it's all about the brain. It's all about the development of the brain. And it's all about really the development of this part of the brain. The rest of your brain's fine in general. It's this part of the brain right in the front, wraps around the front part of your forehead. It's about this thick. It's called the prefrontal cortex. It controls everything. This side right here monitors the stuff you're working on. If you're working on a math problem, it's working over here. It's in this side of your brain. This part of your brain right here in the little slit in here manages your attention, how much attention you pay, how much focus you pay to something. Right here manages how impulsive you are. The more activity right here, the more impulsive you are. Right here manages how much you multitask. This whole front together manages how you react to rewards and punishments. So it's all about what's up here. The problem is that the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex up here, is not completely developed. This is a plot of the development, is not completely developed until you're somewhere in your mid-20s. What that means is that your ability to pay attention, your ability to not be impulsive, your ability to make smart decisions isn't really clear in your brain until you hit your mid to late 20s and starting down in around the 50s and 60s, and you end up then losing those faculties. So how does your brain work? Basically, the way your brain works is very simple. It's not simple to look at, but it's a very simple process. Your brain itself has blood vessels in it, and those blood vessels carry oxygen molecules. Your neurons, your nerve cells, there are billions of nerve cells in your brain. Your nerve cells need oxygen to work. When they get a shot of oxygen, they release chemicals And one nerve cell talks to another by releasing chemicals to this nerve cell, and this nerve cell either accepts it or rejects the chemicals, and they go back and forth. Now, each nerve cell isn't just a nerve cell. It has little shoots, little axons, little dendrites, and they communicate with other nerve cells, and all together they need oxygen in order to work. So the blood carries oxygen to certain areas. When it gets enough oxygen in that area, in the bloodstream, then that area is able to work. When you put yourself in an MRI tube, that's what it's measuring. It's measuring the amount of oxygen in various areas of your brain. It needs that. If you don't have it, it doesn't work. We've already talked about pruning and consolidation. That's what makes your brain cleanse and pick the right stuff to do. Then there's this other part called the default mode network in your brain. It's actually 4 pieces, 4 little areas, here, 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 and here. Those 4 areas, if they are all activated at the same time, and I can see them all activated, means you're either daydreaming, you're being creative, you're free thinking, you're mind wandering, you're meditating. And that's important for the brain because when only those 4 areas are activated, the rest of your brain is sort of quiescent and allowed to just calm and rest, and it allows that pruning and consolidation to happen. So our brains are continually assaulted, and they're assaulted from outside, external distractors, and they're assaulted from inside, internal distractors. Remember the result of the students studying that accessing Facebook, even thinking about Facebook, made them worse students. So there are internal distractors and external distractors. And just to show you how that works, this is your brain when you hear a word. This is the part that lights up, that gets oxygen. When you speak a word, the same area here lights up, but there's a little extra needed in order to speak that word. When you see a word, the same area sort of lights up a little, but a whole extra area is needed to process seeing it. When you think about a word, totally different areas are activated. So there's a difference between hearing, seeing, speaking, and thinking. And actually thinking about something, if you notice, thinking about something activates more areas than any of these other activities. So if you're thinking about Facebook, it's going to activate more areas. If you're thinking about text messaging, it's going to activate more areas of your brain. So here's your studying brain. This is how people study. Oh yeah, they have to study, but your prefrontal cortex is trying to juggle this all, and I always tell people it's like trying to juggle 20 chainsaws all at the same time. You can't do it. Something's got to go, and what typically goes is this. What wins are all those other external things. Technology also makes your brain active. This is a study where they had people read a book. This is the activity in your brain when you're reading a book. They had people search Google. Look how much more activity there is when you're searching Google versus just reading a book. This is what happens when you learn a new task. This is what happens after that task has been practiced a lot. That's the whole idea of the music that you listen to. Remember I said that you should listen to very familiar music? This is when you're hearing a song for the first time. It takes a lot of brain power. When you've heard a song a bunch of times, it takes very little brain power. So what do we know about how technology impacts the brain? Turns out that if you have more online friends, you have more gray matter in the area that deals with memory back in your hippocampus. If you have more online and offline friends together, you have more of an amygdala, which is the center of emotions. It's where your emotional center is, your amygdala. And you have a larger prefrontal cortex, which means that you have more of that decision-making, attention, working area. Listening to music stimulates your hippocampus. All the technology does it. I'm going to skip this part for now, but there was a study of taxi drivers in London. If you've ever been to London, London is the most confusing city to drive in. There are 25,000 streets in London, and in order to qualify as a taxi driver, you have to know all of them. You have to pass a test. You have to know 25,000 streets. So they took taxi drivers in London, and they did brain scans of them, and then they found an equivalent group, same age, similar occupation, same ethnic cultural background, same gender, and they found out that those people who drove taxis had a larger hippocampus, and the hippocampus is the seat of memory. It's where your memory is located. Video gaming. Video gaming is very interesting. It has an effect on your brain. There's a lot of studies of this going on in Asia. Those people who play more video games have bigger brains, basically, and particularly in the risk and reward areas in an area called the striatum, because that's what video games are about, taking risk, getting rewards. And it turns out that taking risk, getting rewards increases that area, which is good. Unfortunately, playing violent games ends up showing less activity in the emotional regulation area, which is the amygdala, and more activity in the aggressive areas, and also produces more dopamine. When you play violent games, it produces dopamine, which ordinarily we associate with pleasure. So you play video games to get a squirt of dopamine. That makes you feel good. The problem is that squirt of dopamine stays around for a long time. And in fact, there's been some research that shows that even if you play a game for a couple hours and then don't play for 2 weeks, and they look in your brain, there's still some dopamine left in your brain from playing the game. So it has really long-term effects. They're studying web addicts in China, and they find that they have bigger brains, which is good on one hand, right? They have a bigger brain, more white matter. The problem is that they have disrupted connections. Those connections between neurons are all disrupted all throughout their brain. So how do you reset your brain? I'm going to demonstrate to you how it works. Let's see. I left my phone down here, which is scary. All right, so here's how it works. Imagine that I am in a classroom, and I am a French student in a French class, and my teacher wants me to be able to pay attention in class. So this is what she does. It's actually real. This is what we're doing. Teacher will come into class and say, okay, everybody, take 1 minute, look at your phone. Do whatever you want. Check Facebook, text, do whatever you want for 1 minute. Turn it on silent, turn it upside down, and put it on the desk. And then you've been a really good student today, so when you put yours upside down on silent, set your alarm for 15 minutes. So 15 minutes, the alarm goes off, this gentleman jumps up and goes, tech break. Students all grab their phone. They have 1 minute to look at their phone, text, turn it upside down, put it on the table. 15 more minutes, tech break. 15 more minutes, tech break. What does that do? Well, it turns out we're doing this in classrooms all around the country, actually all around the world, and all the teachers report to us that the students are doing better in class. And in fact, the teachers also report that they're modifying it a little. Sometimes they'll give them 2 minutes and maybe a 20-minute time period, or 2 minutes and a 30-minute time period. Nobody's been able to get attention after 30 minutes. It seems like that's sort of the max that we can get people to attend, particularly students. The key to it all is the phone sitting right there in front of you. Why? Because the phone is a stimulus that says to your brain, don't worry, don't get anxious. Don't worry, don't get anxious. You'll get to look at me in 15 minutes or less. That's why it works. We're doing it in families, where families that have problems where everybody brings their phone to dinner and nobody pays attention. You know, in restaurants, you go out to a restaurant and everybody's got the phone on the table and they're all looking at the phone, where you're having people do tech breaks during dinner. There's a new game that people play with phones. People are starting to get sort of upset that everybody at the table is always on their phone. So I know people have told me they play this game where everybody takes their phone and they stack it in the middle of the table, one on top of the next, on top of the next. And then they have dinner, and the first person that can't stand it anymore and grabs their phone has to pay the bill. It's a good way of teaching you. It's like a tech break. It's a good way of teaching you, and it's a good way of teaching you why you need to focus rather than pay attention to your technology. And then everything else is about resetting your brain. And I think that's the one thing I hope you'll take away from all of this, is that you know what happens now to your brain. Technology overloads your brain. It is overloading. And the reason it's overloading is because it's multisensory, because there's so many things you can be doing at the same time with your technology. It's overloading. And we need to learn how to reset or calm our brains. And people have studied this for decades now, and we now have a sense of what will calm our brains and how often we have to do it. So the rule is, about every hour or two, do some activity to calm your brain. You have a lot of choices. You know what calms your brain. Mine's not on here. I go make a cup of coffee, and I work on a crossword puzzle for a few minutes. 5, 10 minutes. 10 minutes every hour or two will do it. Here's some choices that we learned from neuroscience. If you take a nature break, if you go outside for 10 minutes and look at the trees, go breathe the air, go walk around, go look at the grass, go do whatever you want to do for 10 minutes every hour or two. That will calm your brain down. By the time you get back, your brain will be calm and reset, and you can start afresh. You can actually even do it virtually. There was a study that allowed you to take an avatar on your computer and walk it through a forest, literally walk your avatar through a forest. Turned out that calmed people's brains down. Don't know why, but it did. If you walk around, though, and it's not in nature, that it's out in a lot of traffic, that actually excites your brain. So don't walk around where there's a lot of noise and traffic and city noise. It has to be quiet, peaceful nature. Listening to music for about 5, 10, 15 minutes every couple hours will do it, as long as the music is stuff you like. Don't listen to stuff you don't like, because that doesn't calm your brain. Look at art, but only look at art that you like. Don't look at art that's troubling. My favorite piece of art is Picasso's Guernica, but I can't look at it and not feel troubled and upset. So when I go look at art, I have a couple art books that sit around, and I look at something that I think is pretty, that's interesting for me. Doing jumping jacks, exercising for 10 minutes resets your brain magically. The chemicals reset your brain. Laughing turns out to reset your brain. If you want to take a hot bath every couple hours, that works too. Hot baths seem to reset your brain for some reason. I don't recommend one every couple hours, but maybe as one of your choices, you use a hot bath to reset your brain. Talking live to a friend, either on the phone or face-to-face, resets your brain, but only if it's a positive conversation. If it's a negative conversation, it actually activates your brain, not resets it. And somebody did a study where they varied the ratio of positive statements in a conversation to negative statements. It has to be at least 3 to 1 positives. If there are any more negatives than that, doesn't work, doesn't reset your brain. You can practice foreign language for 10 minutes. You can play a musical instrument. You can do one of these tech breaks that I talked about. You can do anything that you know calms you down. So what calms you down? Is there something on this list that you think calms your brain? Yeah? What calms your brain? Music? Okay. Meditating. I forgot meditating should be on there. Meditating for 10 minutes is great. Meditating calms your brain completely. Find what calms your own brain and then figure out at what point between an hour and 2 hours your brain gets overloaded. You also know when your brain's overloaded too. It's like it hurts. You stop thinking. When your brain's overloaded and you stop thinking, it's time to reset and calm your brain. And this was a great cover of the recent New Yorker magazine in July. This is a family all on vacation in a beautiful desert island here with water and everything. And here's the person taking a picture of all of them, and they're all on their phones, all at the same time. I thought that was funny, but I was actually in Kauai for my son's wedding this last summer, and we went to a blowhole, you know, where that blows up in the middle like this and makes a huge sound. It was a great blowhole. It was very cool. But it also was producing not just rainbows, but double rainbows at the same time. So we were watching, and it's like, wow, this is really cool. And we're watching for about a half hour. And then this family, a mom and a dad and 3 little kids came up. And the 3 little kids were like 4, 6, and 7, very small. And the little kids are watching intently going, Mommy, Mommy, look how cool that is. Look, it's rainbows and everything. And Mom's going, shh, shh, I'm trying to get a picture of it. Shh, shh, I'm trying to get a picture. Daddy, Daddy, look how much fun it is. Shh, I'm trying to get it on videotape. That's not experiencing something. That's experiencing it through a small lens. We can't experience life through small lenses. We have to experience life through large lenses that our eyes have. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. No questions, right? It's like my class. Yes? How often do I text? Well, I have 4 kids ranging from 22 to 37, and I have 14 students in my lab who all text me. So I probably send and receive about 30 texts a day, maybe. That's a little less than 1,000 a month.
Oh my God.
That's not bad.
That's twice as many.
I have a 22-year-old. She only texts. We've been texting all day. I probably sent her 50 texts today. But typically about 30. I like texting. It's because I can do other things while I'm texting.
True.
Yes?
How do you see the new technology with the newer cars right now when it comes to sync?
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm gonna get up closer because it's room acoustics are terrible. Okay, go ahead.
The newer now they do have that sort of sync where you don't have to really hold on to your phone. You just press that number and then your phone, the call comes in and you can talk as much as you want. How do you see that with the sync system in the new cars?
I think that any new technology is going to challenge us in many ways. And I think we're going to see the challenges first with the younger ones, and it's going to really challenge us along the way. And I think that part of what happens is it gets accepted by a lot of people, and then we all feel like we have to accept it. It's the same thing that happens with any technology. They get accepted by the young people, and then everybody thinks they have to accept it.
So do you think it's safer than holding the phone and talking, or just talk? You don't have to hold on to anything.
You know, nobody's convincingly proved to me that holding the phone to your ear causes any problems. I mean, I've seen the research. It's ambiguous at best. Are you asking if it causes brain tumors or things like that?
No, not really. Is it safer?
Is it safer to talk like when you're driving?
Yes.
No.
Not on the phone with the sync system. I don't know if you're familiar
No.
with the sync system. Anybody familiar with the sync system?
Hands-free?
Yes.
Oh, no. It's not safer. Hands-free is not safer at all. It's not safer than holding the phone at all. All the research shows that they're both equally dangerous. Not as dangerous as texting while you drive, but hands-free or handheld are equally dangerous.
I believe talking to my husband through that same hands-free communication while driving through Reading, because there's certain areas in Reading that I'm not comfortable with, and that helps to distract me.
Okay.
And I can focus on the road, but my brain wants to look other places, you know? But when I'm talking to him, for some reason, it stays focused.
Well, and I would guess it's because, remember I said earlier that part of talking on the phone is you have to fill in the context. You know your husband's context.
Yes.
I mean, so you're not filling in much, and in fact, what you're probably getting is a lot of those chemicals released in your brain that calm you down, because he has obviously a calming influence on you, so that helps you actually. Knowing his context helps you calm down. That's what I would guess. But we could put you in a brain scanning machine and check it out.
As long as you're not going to charge my insurance, and I don't pay that 20%, we're good.
I promise I won't charge your insurance. I can't do that. Yes? Wait, I'm gonna walk my way up. It's much more fun to get closer anyway.
Is there any studies on socialization face-to-face in terms of anxiety or confrontation or, you know?
As opposed to,
Because texting is such a prevalent way of, just like your daughter example, to me, you know, to me it's more efficient just to pick up the phone, let's talk about and figure this out, than
Right.
send 30 texts.
as opposed to sending text back and forth and back and
Or
forth.
with preteens or teens and stuff, for example, going to high school dance, you know, the traditional boys in the corner and the girls, you know, how do we communicate and come to each other and talk now? You know, are we just going to text and ask, do you want to dance?
Which they will, by the way. They will text across the room, do you want to dance? And they'll say, yes, I
Like
do.
what happened in the good old days to talk to each other? Is there any studies on that?
You know, there are a lot of studies going on now. And there's some really interesting books if you want to read some books on it. There's one called Alone Together, which is a book written by an MIT psychologist, Sherry Turkle, who talks about, she sees it as a major problem. She sees it as a tragically major problem that we're not communicating face-to-face. On the other hand, there's lots of research that shows that shy people bolster their confidence by communicating online, and that even people who aren't very good at giving empathetic responses to someone, can practice that online and learn those skills and transfer them into the real world. We're doing a study right now actually where we're actually teaching people social skills but face-to-face or online, and then switching it to see if they can use those social skills in the opposite condition. I have no idea whether it's going to work or not. I mean, ideally what I'd like to see is that you can teach somebody social skills online and then have them demonstrate them face-to-face in the real world. I think it will happen. I think regardless of whether we think it's good or bad, it's going on. But I think bottom line, when you have kids, you have to make sure that they have time to learn face-to-face communication. Because part of face-to-face communication is picking up all of the subtle cues, like he's nodding his head a little back there, and I pick up, no, you didn't nod it much, but just a little, enough that I picked up the social cue. You can't get those social cues by typing, you know, a text message or even an email. And so I would say that you have to get your kids to learn at a young age how to pick up those social cues, that's critical. And I do a lot of speaking to parents, and I tell them that when your kids are young, they need 1 minute, for every minute of computer time or technology time or TV time, 5 minutes of human contact time, so they can learn naturally those skills of picking up context, picking up cues. Otherwise, you miss out on most of the important stuff of communication. Most of the stuff of communication that happens is nonverbal. It's all that, various facial expressions and body language and standing like this or whatever. We pick that up, and as kids we learn, oh yeah, when mommy's standing like this, she's pissed at me. But you can't see this on a text message. It just doesn't exist. Other questions, comments?
Actually, I have another question.
Go for it.
Yeah,
I'm up here anyway.
Kind of hogging the floor here, but I teach here at the university, and we've had all sorts of debates about, allowing text breaks and all these kind of things. And someone brought up in the conversation, I thought it was a good point. Are we just feeding an addiction by allowing the text? So, for example, an alcoholic, we wouldn't give them a drink break, right? So with texting, that was one of the arguments that was brought forth. So why are we giving them a break? Are we just feeding?
Do you want me to give you the answer?
No, nobody knew the answer.
I know the
We
answer.
didn't have you on hand,
Okay,
so.
I know the answer. And actually, it's a really good question, so I'm gonna take the answer down here so everybody can hear and see. Those two terms, the two terms are very confusing. One is addiction and the other is obsession. And we tend to use them interchangeably. We tend to say, I'm addicted to video games or I'm obsessed with video games. I'm addicted to my phone or I'm obsessed with my phone. In your brain, they're totally different. Addiction is doing an activity to get a squirt of dopamine in your brain that we've learned to interpret as pleasure. Obsession is there's already chemicals in your brain that make you anxious, and you're doing an activity to reduce those chemicals in your brain, mostly cortisol and things like that. So when you say the kids are addicted to their phones, they're not addicted to their phones. They're obsessed with their phones. So what's happening, and the reason why tech breaks work, by the way, is what's happening is if you don't let them check their phones, what happens in their brain is little dribbles of anxiety chemicals start leaking out, and they take over their thought process. So instead of being able to pay attention to your lecture, what they're doing is going, I wonder who texted me. I wonder if anybody's commented on my Facebook page. I wonder if I got to remember to do this. And they're just obsessing. Remember the movie with Jack Nicholson, As Good as It Gets, where he's has OCD and he's always unlocking and locking doors and washing his hands obsessively? That's what kids are like with their cell phones now. It's literally an obsession. That's why 75% of young kids check their phone every 15 minutes or less. They're not doing it to get pleasure. They're doing it to reduce the anxiety. So the answer to the faculty who don't believe it, the answer really is if you don't let them do it, they're not going to pay attention to you, because they're going to be so overwhelmed with the anxiety that they can't do it. I mean, you can tell that in a movie theater. You're not supposed to use your phone in a movie theater. Go to a movie theater with young kids. They all use their phone in the middle of the movie because they can't stand to sit for more than 15 minutes or 20 minutes without checking in. It's a level of anxiety. I mean, we've got brain scans to show it. The anxiety chemicals just go nuts in their brain. And the longer you make them wait, the more chemicals they have in their brain. Yes?
So then, it's an obsessive compulsion, but what you're looking at on the internet, for instance, becomes an addiction because you do it over and over and you need to have it.
If you need to have it to get pleasure, it becomes an addiction. If you need to have it just so you don't feel nervous or anxious anymore, it's an obsession. You got the difference, yeah. And things like gambling is an addiction. You gamble, there's no anxiety about not gambling. You gamble to get pleasure out of winning. You drink. Drinking can be an addiction. You drink because you think you feel pleasure. Those are addictions. This is not, it's an obsession. Gaming is in general an addiction, yes. Gaming is absolutely an addiction because you do it and we watch gamers' brains and they get squirts of dopamine like that. And sadly, those squirts of dopamine stay and stay and stay and stay. They're literally, gamers go through forms of withdrawal, just like any other addiction. And that's also how you can tell. Addiction, you get to go through withdrawal. Yes?
I guess I'm just going to sound like a baby boomer, and with agreeing kind of a little bit with, Greg's concern up here, we're fellow professors. You know, when's it gonna end, though? That we're just gonna just say, okay, this is gonna be all right, you only have a 15-minute attention span. And that's okay, and then, you know, the next generation is gonna be 10 minutes, or it's gonna be simultaneous.
Right. This is why I
With the
recommend.
anxiety.
Right. This is why I recommend that people do that tech break and start expanding the attention and focus. And actually, my next book is on focus and attention and what we need to be doing to do exactly that. We don't need to be caving into a short attention span, because then basically what we'll do is cave into a 3-minute attention span.
Right.
Because left to their own devices, 3 minutes is it.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that. We want to teach them how to lengthen that. I mean, I'd like to be able to figure out ways to get people to lengthen their attention span to a half hour, 45 minutes, or more. Most people have a 3 to 5 minute attention span at best, and then they move off and do something else.
Okay, that answers it.
Yeah, no, I think we have to be working at that, and I think that's the new major issue, I think, is how do we increase our focus? How do we get our kids, teach our kids and ourselves? Because trust me, I used to be able to read long New Yorker articles, for example. I get page 3 of a New Yorker article. When is this gonna end? There are 8 more pages left. I can't read it. I can't focus on it. And I know it's because I use a lot of texting and stuff that's shrinking my focus.
So you're saying that we need to use rewards in order to make ourselves get better trained to like concentrate?
We need to figure out ways to help us learn how to concentrate, yes.
Okay.
And I think that the key is to learn metacognition, to learn how your own individual brain works. If you know how your brain works and you know what distracts you, then that's half the battle of knowing how to help yourself concentrate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really about learning yourself. It's learning about metacognition. Yes? Wait, I'm going to move up because you have a very soft voice. I remember that.
Is there any way that we can get copies of these slides
Yes.
somewhere?
Email me, and I'll throw them in a Dropbox and show you how to get it.
Oh, thanks.
What's your email?
How about if you Google me?
Okay.
Google me and you'll find my email, or I have cards in my pocket too. I have cards in my pocket if you want to go the easy old style route. But just Google
me.
Just Google me.
Like, I wish I could do that.
That's great.
When you've been around for 62 years and your career has spanned 37 years and you have 5 books, you can Google somebody.
Okay, I'll tell
You
someone
can
to
Google
me
somebody.
when I get there.
I am Googleable. Although I have to tell you, when you Google my name, you'll find that there are at least 3 other fairly famous Larry Rosens. One's a music producer, one's a famous attorney, and
I'll
I
put in
forget.
doc.
One's a doctor also.
Oh my gosh.
Other
I'll
questions?
probably end up
Other
being a-
questions?
That was great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.